The cold Wyoming wind cut through Tommy's worn jacket like a knife as he walked back to his tiny cabin. His boots had holes in them, and with each step, the freezing ground reminded him just how broke he really was. 28 years old, and all he had to his name was $1 silver jingling in his pocket. Tommy worked at the Broken Arrow Ranch, the biggest spread in the county. He fed cattle, mended fences, and did whatever back-breaking work needed doing from sunrise to sunset. But this winter had been brutal. Snow came early and stayed late, killing half the herd. The ranch owner, Mr. Peterson, had to cut everyone's pay just to keep the place running. Most of the other ranch hands had families to go home to or enough savings to tide them over. Tommy had neither. His parents died when he was 16, and he'd been working odd jobs ever since just to survive. Some nights, he went to bed with nothing but water in his belly. That evening, Tommy sat at his rickety kitchen table, staring at a week-old newspaper someone had left behind at the general store. He'd already read every article twice, but there wasn't much else to do. The kerosene for his lamp was running low, and he couldn't afford to buy more until next payday. His eyes drifted to the back pages, where people posted advertisements for everything from used saddles to lost dogs. That's when he saw the section that made his heart skip a beat. Marriage correspondence, it said at the top. Dozens of ads from women looking for husbands, men seeking wives. Tommy had heard about mail-order brides before, but he'd never paid much attention. Rich men in the cities used services like this to find wives, not poor cowboys like him. But curiosity got the better of him, and he started reading. Most of the ads were what you'd expect. Beautiful young woman seeks prosperous gentleman for marriage. Must own land and have steady income. Tommy shook his head. Didn't qualify for any of these requirements. Then, near the bottom of the page, one ad caught his eye. It was shorter than the others and written in a different tone entirely. Young woman, age 24, injured in accident, seeks marriage arrangement. Cannot walk but can manage household duties. Will consider any sincere offer from honest man. Tommy read it 3 times. Unlike the other ads that listed demands and requirements, this one seemed desperate. It reminded him of his own situation, honestly. Both of them seemed to be running out of options. The next morning, Tommy asked around town about the mail-order bride services. Mrs. Henderson at the general store knew all about them. She explained how it worked. You'd write a letter to the agency. They'd pass it along to the woman. And if she was interested, you'd start corresponding. But it costs money, dear, Mrs. Henderson warned him. The agency charges a fee, and then there's the cost of train tickets and the wedding itself. Most men spend at least $100 on the whole process. Tommy's heart sank. $100 might as well have been $1,000. He barely had enough to buy coffee and beans for the week. That night, he sat down and wrote a letter anyway. He wasn't good with words, having only learned to read and write a few years back, but he did his best to be honest. Dear Miss, he wrote, I saw your advertisement in the paper. I'm not a rich man, and I can't offer you much. I'm a ranch hand in Wyoming, and I work hard for what little I have. I don't know much about your situation, but I understand what it's like when people don't give you a chance, if you're willing. To take a risk on a poor cowboy, I promise I'll do my best to take care of you. He paused, chewing on his pencil. How much should he offer? He literally had $1 to his name. Most men probably offered $50 or $100 just to start the conversation. Tommy made a decision that would change his life forever. He pulled out his last silver dollar and placed it on the table next to his letter. I know this isn't much, he continued writing, but this dollar represents everything I have in the world. I'm offering it not because it's a lot of money, but because it shows I'm willing to give everything I have for a chance at building something better together. The next day, Tommy walked into town and handed his letter to Mrs. Henderson, along with his precious silver dollar to pay for the postage and agency fee. She looked at the coin, then at Tommy's worn clothes and thin face. Are you sure about this, son? She asked gently. This is all the money you have, Tommy nodded. Sometimes you have to bet everything on a long shot, ma'am. Mrs. Henderson smiled and promised to send the letter that very day. Weeks passed without a response. Tommy began to think he'd made a terrible mistake. He was eating nothing but beans and whatever scraps he could find. Other ranch hands started sharing their meals with him, though he was too proud to ask for help directly then. On a snowy Thursday morning, Mrs. Henderson called him over when he came to town for supplies. "Tommy, you've got a letter," she said, holding up an envelope with his name written in careful, feminine handwriting. His hands shook as he opened it. The letter was longer than he'd expected, written in beautiful script that showed real education. "Dear Tommy," it began, "your letter surprised me. In 3 weeks I've received dozens of responses to my advertisement. Men have offered me money, land, and promises of comfort. But yours was the only one that offered something more valuable: honesty and respect." Tommy's heart began to race as he read on. "My name is Rebecca, and I was injured in a carriage accident 2 years ago. The doctors say I'll never walk again. My family, once loving and supportive, now sees me as a burden they can't afford to keep. They've made it clear that I need to find my own way in the world." The letter went on to explain that Rebecca had been a school teacher before her accident. She could read, write, cook, sew, and manage a household. But her condition made her unmarriageable in the eyes of most men. "I've been corresponding with the marriage agency for months," she wrote, "but every man who learns about my condition withdraws his offer. You're the first person who seems to see past my limitations to the person I still am underneath." Tommy wiped his eyes, not realizing he'd started crying. The letter concluded with words that made his heart soar. "I accept your offer, Tommy, not because of the dollar, but because of the man who was willing to give his last dollar to a stranger. If you're still willing, I can be on the next train to Wyoming." Mrs. Henderson found Tommy sitting on her front steps an hour later, still holding the letter and grinning like a fool. "Good news, I take it?" she asked. "She said yes," Tommy whispered, still hardly believing it. "She actually said yes." That night, Tommy wrote back immediately, telling Rebecca about his small cabin, his job at the ranch, and his dreams of maybe owning a little land someday. He promised to meet her train and to do everything in his power to make her happy. As he sealed the letter, Tommy realized something had changed inside him. For the first time in years, he had hope. I had something to look forward to, someone who was counting on him. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building toward a future. The silver dollar might have been the best investment he'd ever made, even though he didn't know it yet. Tommy stood on the wooden platform of the train station, his heart beating so hard he thought everyone could hear it. He'd borrowed a clean shirt from his bunkmate Jake, and had spent an hour trying to tame his unruly hair with water and pomade. His hands kept fidgeting with the small bunch of wildflowers he'd picked that morning, their stems already wilting in his nervous grip. The train was late, which gave him more time to worry. What if Rebecca had changed her mind? What if she took one look at him and decided she'd made a terrible mistake? Tommy wasn't much to look at. He knew that. His face was weathered from years of outdoor work, and his clothes, even the borrowed clean ones, marked him clearly as a working man. But worse than his appearance was his living situation. His cabin was barely big enough for one person, alone too. The roof leaked in 3 places. The floor was just rough wooden planks. And he didn't even have a proper bed, just a thin mattress on a wooden frame he'd built himself. How could he bring a lady, especially one who couldn't walk, to such a place? The sound of the train whistle in the distance made his stomach flip. There was no backing out now. As the great iron beast pulled into the station with a hiss of steam and screech of brakes, Tommy scanned the windows, looking for any sign of a woman traveling alone. The conductor helped several passengers down, but Tommy didn't see anyone who looked like they might be Rebecca. Then he heard a voice call out, "Excuse me, could you help me with this?" And Tommy turned toward the sound and felt his breath catch in his throat. A young woman was sitting in what appeared to be a wooden wheelchair at the train car door, speaking to the conductor. She had auburn hair pinned up neatly under a simple blue hat, and even from a distance, Tommy could see her green eyes were sharp and intelligent, but what struck him most wasn't her beauty, though she was certainly pretty. It was her composure. While the conductor fussed about how to help her down, she remained calm and patient, giving clear instructions about how to handle her chair and belongings. Tommy dropped his flowers and rushed over. "Ma'am, are you Rebecca?" She looked up at him and for a moment neither of them spoke. Tommy saw something in her eyes, a kind of measuring look, as if she were taking his full measure in that single glance. "You must be Tommy," she said finally, and her voice was warm with just a hint of nervousness. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd changed your mind." "No, ma'am," Tommy said quickly. "I've been waiting here for 2 hours just to make sure I didn't." Miss Yu, the conductor, a gruff older man, was clearly out of his depth. "Sir, I'm not sure how to get the lady down safely with this contraption." "It's called a wheelchair," Rebecca said matter-of-factly, "and I can manage if you'll just help me lift it down first." Tommy stepped forward. "May I?" When she nodded, he carefully lifted the wooden chair down to the platform. It was heavier than he'd expected, solidly built with thick wheels and worn smooth handles. Someone had put a lot of work into making it. "My father built it," Rebecca explained, as if reading his thoughts. "He's quite handy with woodwork." With the conductor's help, Tommy then assisted Rebecca from the train car to her chair. She moved with practiced ease, clearly accustomed to the process. But Tommy noticed how careful she was to maintain her dignity throughout. Her belongings consisted of a small trunk, worn leather satchel, and a wooden crate that rattled mysteriously when moved. "Books," she explained with a slight smile when she saw Tommy's curious look. "I couldn't bear to leave them behind." As they made their way through the small station, Tommy noticed how people stared. Some looked curious, others sympathetic, and a few seemed uncomfortable, quickly looking away. Rebecca kept her chin up and her eyes forward, but Tommy could see the slight tension in her shoulders. The justice of the peace is waiting for us at his office," Tommy said as they reached the street. "That is, if you still want to go through with this." Rebecca stopped her chair and looked up at him seriously.
"Tommy, before we take another step, I need to ask you something."
"Are you sure about this? Really sure?" "Because once we're married, I don't want you to feel trapped. Can't run away if things get difficult, and I can't change what I am." Tommy knelt down beside her chair so they were at eye level. "Miss Rebecca, I've been sure since the day I sent that letter. I know this isn't a normal situation, but I think maybe that's what makes it right for both of us." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's go get married, Tommy. It's the ceremony at Justice of the Peace, Morrison's office." It was brief and simple. The only witnesses were Morrison's wife and the town clerk, who happened to be filing papers. Rebecca had no ring, and neither did Tommy. But Mrs. Morrison offered to lend them her mother's simple gold band for the ceremony. When Morrison asked if Tommy would take Rebecca as his lawfully wedded wife, in sickness and in health, Tommy's voice was steady and sure. "I do." When it was Rebecca's turn, she looked directly into Tommy's eyes as she said, "I do," and her voice was just as firm. The walk back to Tommy's cabin was quiet. Rebecca's chair handled the dirt roads better than Tommy had expected, though he had. To help her over a few rough patches, he found himself stealing glances at her, still hardly believing she was real. When they reached the cabin, Tommy's heart sank. In the afternoon light, the place looked even smaller and shabbier than usual. The single room contained his bed, a small table, 2 chairs, a wood stove, and not much else. There was no indoor plumbing, just a well outside and an outhouse behind. "The cabin. It's not much," Tommy said, his voice heavy with embarrassment. "I know it's not what you're used to." Rebecca was quiet for a moment as she looked around the space. Then she surprised him by rolling her chair over to the window. "The light is good here," she said. "Could set up a reading area by this window, and this table would work perfectly for correspondence and writing." She turned to look at him. "Tommy, I didn't come here expecting luxury. I came here expecting honesty and kindness. This cabin tells me you're a man who makes do with what he has and doesn't waste money on show. That's exactly the kind of man I hoped you'd be." That evening, as they shared a simple dinner of beans, bacon, and biscuits that Rebecca had insisted on preparing despite Tommy's protests, they talked about their lives. Rebecca told him about her accident, how a drunk driver had crashed into her family's carriage, killing her younger brother and leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. "My family tried to be supportive at first," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "But as months passed, and it became clear I wasn't going to recover, I could see the burden I'd become. They never said it directly, but but I could feel their resentment growing. Tommy told her about his parents' deaths, about the years of barely scraping by, about his dreams of someday owning a small piece of land where he could raise cattle or horses. "I never learned to read properly until I was 25, he admitted. "A school teacher in town took pity on me and taught me letters. And numbers? I'm still not very good at it." Rebecca's eyes lit up. "I was a teacher before my accident. I'd be happy to help you improve your reading if you'd like." As the evening wore on, Tommy found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. Rebecca was easy to talk to, quick to laugh, and showed genuine interest in his work and his dreams. When it came time for bed, Tommy insisted on taking blankets and sleeping on the floor, giving Rebecca the bed. "This isn't permanent," he promised as he made his makeshift bed. "I'll build us a proper house, with separate rooms and everything a lady needs." "Tommy," Rebecca said softly from the bed, "you don't need to prove anything to me. We're both starting over and we'll figure it out together." As he lay on the hard floor listening to the wind outside, Tommy realized something had changed in him already. For the first time in his adult life, he wasn't alone. He had someone who was counting on him, someone who saw value in the simple life he could offer. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he felt like the richest man in Wyoming. Tommy woke up on the third morning of his marriage with a sore back from sleeping on the floor, but he didn't mind. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the small cabin, and he could hear Rebecca humming softly as she worked at the stove. Just 3 days, she had already made the place feel more like a home than it ever had. He sat up and watched her navigate the small kitchen in her wheelchair with remarkable efficiency. She had rearranged everything to be within her reach, and Tommy was amazed at how smoothly she moved around the limited space. "Good morning, husband," she said with a smile, not turning around, but somehow knowing he was awake. "Morning, wife," Tommy replied, the words still feeling strange and wonderful on his tongue. "You didn't have to cook again." "I could have made something." Rebecca laughed, a sound that was becoming Tommy's favorite part of each day. "Tommy, I've tasted your cooking. If we're going to survive this marriage, one of us needs to take charge of the kitchen, and it's not going to be you." After breakfast, Tommy headed off to work at the ranch, but his mind kept wandering back to the cabin. The first time in his life he had someone waiting for him at home. Someone who would ask about his day and actually care about the answer. When he returned that evening, he found Rebecca sitting at the table with papers spread out in front of her. She looked up as he entered, her eyes bright with excitement. "Tommy, I've been thinking about ways we could improve our situation," she said. "I wrote letters to 3 families in town today, offering to do their mending and alterations. Mrs. Peterson from the general store already stopped by and left a basket of clothes that need repair." Tommy looked at the neat pile of torn shirts and worn pants. "You don't have to work, Rebecca. I can provide for us." "I know you can," she said gently, "but I want to contribute. I need to feel useful, Tommy. Before my accident, I was independent. I had my own income, my own purpose. I can't just sit here all day while you work yourself to death trying to support both of us." That weekend, Tommy spent his time off building ramps and making modifications to the cabin. He constructed a wooden ramp leading to the front door and widened the doorway to make it easier for Rebecca's wheelchair to pass through. He also built a lower work surface in the kitchen and installed shelves at the perfect height for her to reach while seated. "You're handy with tools," Rebecca observed, watching him work on Saturday afternoon. "Did you learn carpentry somewhere? Picked it up over the years?" Tommy said, measuring a piece of wood. "When you don't have money to pay people to fix things, you learn to do it yourself. Could you build me a desk? Something where I could sit comfortably and write letters, or do detailed sewing work?" Tommy paused in his sawing, of course. "What would you like it to look like?" They spent the next hour drawing plans on the back of an old envelope, Rebecca describing exactly what she needed, and Tommy figuring out how to build it. Working together like this felt natural, like they'd been partners for years instead of. Days the following week brought their first real test as a couple. Tommy came home from work looking troubled, and Rebecca noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down the shirt she was mending. Tommy sat heavily in his chair. "Mr. Peterson called me into his office today," said some of the other. "Hands have been complaining about me bringing you to town events." They think it's not appropriate. Having a woman in a wheelchair around. Rebecca's face flushed with anger. And what did you tell him? I told him that you're my wife, and if they don't like it, they can find themselves another ranch hand. Rebecca stared at him for a moment, then wheeled her chair over to where he sat. Tommy, you could lose your job over this. Can't afford for you to make enemies at work. I don't care, Tommy said firmly. I won't have anyone disrespecting. You're worth more than any job. That night, Rebecca was quiet during dinner. Tommy could tell something was bothering her, but he wasn't sure how to ask. Finally, she spoke up. Tommy, I need to tell you something about my family, about why I really had to leave. She took a deep breath. My accident wasn't just bad luck. My Uncle Charles was driving that carriage, and he'd been drinking heavily at a business dinner. When we crashed, my little brother Danny was killed instantly. I was thrown from the carriage and my back was broken. Tommy reached across the table and took her hand. Uncle Charles was an important man in our town, Rebecca continued. Rich, influential, with connections to the mayor and the sheriff. My parents were afraid that if word got out about his drinking, it would ruin our family's reputation. So, they made me promise to never tell anyone the truth about what happened. But that's not right, Tommy said. He should have faced consequences for what he did. I know that now, Rebecca said. But at the time, I was so hurt and confused, I just went along with it. As months passed and I didn't get better, I became a reminder of that terrible night. Every time they looked at me, they saw the secret they were keeping. It became easier for them to send me away than to deal with the guilt. Tommy squeezed her hand. I'm sorry you went through that, but I'm glad you told me. Wanted you to know that when I came here, I wasn't just looking for a husband. I was looking for a place where I could be myself again, where I didn't have to hide or feel ashamed. You never have to hide anything from me, Rebecca. Not ever. As winter approached, their little cabin became a gathering place for neighbors. Rebecca's cooking was legendary, and she had a gift for making people feel welcome. The same ranch hands who had initially complained about her presence started stopping by for coffee and conversation. Tommy was amazed at how Rebecca could draw people out, getting the shyest cowboy to talk about his family back east, or convincing the gruffest old-timer to share stories about the early days of the territory. She treated everyone with the same respect and interest. Whether they were the ranch owner's son or the Mexican stable hand that others often ignored. You're a natural teacher, Tommy observed one evening, after a group of neighbors had left. I miss it, Rebecca admitted. Teaching, I mean. There's something special about watching someone understand something new, seeing their face light up when they figure out a problem. Maybe you could teach again someday, Tommy suggested. Rebecca shook her head. Who would hire a teacher who can't walk? Parents want someone who can chase after their children, supervise them properly. Maybe the right parents would care more about what's in your head than what's wrong with your legs, Tommy said. That gave Rebecca something to think about. Tommy's reading lessons became a nightly ritual. After dinner, Rebecca would pull out one of her books, and they would read together, by lamplight. Tommy's skills improved rapidly under her patient instruction, and soon he was reading entire pages without help. You're a quick learner, Rebecca praised him one evening as he finished a chapter about cattle ranching techniques. I had a good teacher, Tommy replied, looking up from the book to smile at her. One snowy evening in December, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Rebecca made an announcement that surprised Tommy. I want to start a small school, she said. Not a formal one, but maybe I could teach some of the local children who can't afford to go to school in town. I could hold classes here in the cabin a few days a week. Tommy looked around their small space. Do you think we have room? We could make room, Rebecca said. And Tommy, some of the adults around here can't read either. I've noticed it when they come to visit. Maybe I could help them too. Tommy felt his heart swell with pride. His wife wasn't just surviving her difficult circumstances. She was finding ways to thrive and help others do the same. I think that's a wonderful idea, he said. What do you need to make it happen? Some basic supplies and your support, Rebecca said, and maybe a few more chairs? I can build chairs, Tommy said. I can build whatever you need. As they planned Rebecca's school, Tommy realized that something magical was happening in their little cabin. They weren't just surviving anymore. were building something beautiful together. Two people who had been cast aside by the world had found each other and were creating a life filled with purpose and love. That night, as Tommy settled onto his floor bed, he smiled in the darkness. He'd thought he was rescuing Rebecca when he sent that letter, but she was rescuing him right back. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it changes that would transform Tommy and Rebecca's life forever. The snow melted away to reveal green grass and wildflowers. What had started as teaching 3 neighbor children to read had grown into something much bigger. Every Tuesday and Thursday, their small cabin filled with students of all ages. There was a tea-rolled Lucy, whose parents worked too hard to send her to the town school. 16-year-old Miguel, who spoke perfect English but had never learned to read it. Old Pete, the graying cowboy, who was embarrassed that he couldn't even write his own name. And a dozen others who had somehow missed out on formal education. Rebecca had a gift for making each person feel comfortable, no matter their age or skill level. She never made anyone feel stupid for not knowing something. And she celebrated every small victory like it was the greatest achievement in the world. Tommy watched her work with growing amazement and something else he was just beginning to recognize as love. Real love. Not just the gratitude and companionship that had brought them together, but the deep kind of love that made him want to give her everything good the world had to offer. One evening in late April, they cleaned up after a particularly busy lesson. Tommy found the courage to say what had been building in his heart for months. "Rebecca," he said, carefully stacking the slates the students used for writing practice, "I need to tell you something."
I married me.
The reading primers, her hands growing still. "What is it, Tommy?" "When we got married, it was supposed to be an arrangement. A business deal, sort of. You needed a home, and I needed—" "Well, I needed someone," Rebecca nodded, not interrupting. "But somewhere along the way, it stopped being an arrangement for me." Tommy's voice was quiet, but steady. "I love you, Rebecca. Not because you're my wife or because you cook good food or because you make our cabin feel like a home. I love you because of who you are, your strength, your kindness, the way you see the best in everyone." Rebecca was quiet for so long that Tommy began to worry he'd said too much too soon. Then she wheeled her chair over to where he stood and took his hands in hers. "To say that because I've been feeling the same way for weeks now, I love you too. Not because you rescued me or because you worked so hard to take care of me. I love you because you're the first person who ever looked at me and saw all of me, not just what was broken." That night, Tommy moved his bedroll from the floor to beside Rebecca's bed. They talked until dawn about their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. For the first time since her accident, Rebecca allowed herself to dream big again. The next week brought news that would change everything. Mr. Peterson, the ranch owner, called Tommy into his office with an offer that seemed too good to be true. "I've been watching you for 2 years now," Peterson said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You're reliable, hardworking, and the men respect you. I'm getting too old to manage the day-to-day operations of this ranch, and my son isn't ready to take over yet." Tommy shifted nervously in his seat, unsure where this was leading. "I'm offering you the position of ranch foreman," Peterson continued. "It comes with a significant raise in pay, a better house in town, and the authority to make decisions about ranch operations." Tommy's mind raced. Foreman's position was what every ranch hand dreamed of. It meant respect, good pay, and a secure future. But it also meant leaving their little cabin, leaving the place where he and Rebecca had built their life together. "Mr. Peterson, I'm honored by the offer, but I need to discuss this with my wife," Tommy said. Peterson nodded approvingly. A man who consults his wife on important decisions is a man who understands what matters in life. "Take your time, but don't take too long. I'd like to make the change by summer." That evening, Tommy told Rebecca about the offer. He expected her to be excited, but instead she grew quiet and thoughtful. "What's troubling you?" Tommy asked. "The house in town," Rebecca said slowly. "It would be bigger, nicer than this cabin. But it would also be closer to people who might not understand about my school, about what we're doing here." "Your school is important," Tommy said. "More important than any job. But this is your chance, Tommy. A chance to be more than just another ranch hand. You deserve this opportunity." They spent hours discussing the pros and cons. The bigger house would have real rooms. indoor plumbing, and space for Rebecca to expand her teaching. But it would also mean leaving the community they'd built, the neighbors who had become like family. Finally, Rebecca made a suggestion that surprised Tommy. "What if we took the job but used our influence to do something bigger?" she said. "If we turned this into a real school, not just informal lessons in our cabin?" "What do you mean?" Rebecca's eyes lit up with excitement as the idea took shape. "There are dozens of children in this county who can't get to the town school because it's too far or too expensive. What if we started a proper school for them? We could use the better salary to rent a building, buy real supplies, maybe even hire another teacher eventually." Tommy felt his heart racing with the possibility. "Do you think people would support something like that?" "I think parents want their children to have opportunities," Rebecca said. "I think there are more people like us out here than anyone realizes. People who've been overlooked or underestimated, who just need someone to believe in them." The next morning, Tommy accepted Peterson's offer, but with a condition. He asked for permission to start a small school on ranch property for the children of ranch hands and neighboring families. Peterson, impressed by Tommy's initiative and community spirit, agreed immediately. "An educated workforce is a better workforce," Peterson said. "If you and your wife can pull this off, you'll have my full support." Over the next month, Tommy and Rebecca threw themselves into planning their school. Rebecca wrote letters to her former teaching colleagues back east asking for advice on curriculum and supplies. Tommy spent his evenings after work building desks, benches, and bookshelves. The community response was overwhelming. Families donated whatever they could: books, slates, pencils, even lumber for construction. Mrs. Henderson from the general store offered to order supplies at cost. The local minister donated his time to teach Sunday lessons about values and character. But the most meaningful support came from their students themselves. Old Pete, who had learned to write his name under Rebecca's patient instruction, spent a week carefully lettering a sign that read Prairie View School in beautiful script. Miguel, now reading at a 5th grade level, helped teach the younger children. Lucy's parents sent fresh milk and eggs. Every week, the school officially opened on a sunny Monday morning in June. 23 students, ranging in age from 6 to 60, attended the first day. Rebecca had never been happier, moving between groups of students with the confidence of someone who had found her true calling. Tommy watched from the doorway as his wife worked with a group of struggling readers. Her patience infinite, her encouragement genuine. This was the woman he'd married for convenience, the woman who had responded to his desperate dollar offer. Now she was transforming an entire community, one student at a time, that evening. As they sat on the porch of their new house in town, Rebecca reached over and took Tommy's hand. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't sent that letter?" she asked. Tommy squeezed her hand gently. "I try not to think about it," he said. "It scares me too much." "I think we would have found each other somehow," Rebecca said. "People who are meant to be together usually find a way." Maybe Tommy agreed. "I'm glad we didn't have to wait any longer than we did." As the sun set over the Wyoming landscape, Tommy reflected on how much their lives had changed. A year ago, he'd been a lonely cowboy with nothing but a silver dollar to his name. Now, he was a ranch foreman with a thriving school, a loving wife, and a community that looked up to him. But the biggest change wasn't in their circumstances. It was in themselves. They had both discovered that love wasn't just about finding someone to share your life with. It was about finding someone who inspired you to become the best version of yourself. Someone who saw your dreams and helped you make them reality. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they worked to expand the school and serve even more students, but tonight they were content to sit together, planning their future and marveling at how far they'd come from that desperate advertisement in a worn newspaper. 2 years had passed since Tommy and Rebecca's wedding, and their little school had become the pride of the county. What started as informal lessons in their cabin now served over 60 students across 3 buildings. Rebecca had hired 2 assistant teachers, and families traveled from as far as 50 miles away to enroll their children. Tommy stood in the main schoolroom that Tuesday morning, watching Rebecca work with a group of teenage students on advanced mathematics. The sight still filled him with wonder. His wife had not only survived being cast aside by her family, She had built something that was changing lives across the entire region. The morning was interrupted by the sound of an expensive carriage pulling up outside. Through the window, Tommy could see it was fancy, the kind that wealthy city folks used. The driver was dressed in a fine uniform, and the passengers were clearly people of means, expecting anyone special today. Tommy asked Rebecca quietly. She glanced toward the window and her face went pale. The pencil in her hand began to tremble, and for a moment she looked like she might faint. "Rebecca, what's wrong?" "It's my cousin Robert," she whispered, "Uncle Charles's son. I haven't seen him since before I left home." Tommy felt his protective instincts kick in immediately. "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know," Rebecca said, her voice shaky. "Never expected to see anyone from my family again." The well-dressed man who stepped out of the carriage was clearly uncomfortable, looked around at the simple buildings and dusty yard like he'd landed on another planet. When he entered the schoolroom, his eyes searched until they found Rebecca. Double quotes, "Hello, cousin," he said awkwardly. "You're looking well." Rebecca had composed herself, but Tommy could see the tension in her shoulders. "Robert, this is certainly unexpected. What brings you all the way to Wyoming?" Robert glanced around at the students who were watching this exchange with obvious curiosity. "Perhaps we could speak privately." Rebecca dismissed her students for an early lunch break, and the three adults moved to the small office Tommy had built for Rebecca's administrative work. "I have news," Robert began, then seemed to struggle with how to continue. "It's about my father." Rebecca waited, saying nothing. "He died 3 months ago," Robert said finally. "Liver failure. The drinking finally caught up with him?" Tommy watched his wife's face carefully. He saw sadness there, but also something that looked like relief. "I'm sorry for your loss," Rebecca said formally. "There's more," Robert continued. "Before he died, he made a confession. He told the whole family about the night of your accident, about how he'd been drinking, about what really happened to your brother." Rebecca's hands gripped the arms of her wheelchair. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because he left you something in his will, something substantial." Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out several official-looking documents. "You've inherited his ranch in Colorado, along with a considerable sum of money. $50,000 to be exact." Tommy's mouth fell open. $50,000 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. The ranch foreman's salary that had seemed so generous was less than what some rich folks spent on a single horse. "He also left a letter," Robert continued, holding out a sealed envelope. "He asked me to deliver it personally and to tell you that the family wants to make things right. We want you to come home, Rebecca. Come back where you belong." Rebecca took the letter with trembling hands but didn't open it immediately. "Where I belong? You're a woman of means now," Robert said. "You could live in comfort, have servants to help you, access to the best doctors. There might even be treatments available now that weren't options before." Tommy felt something cold settle in his stomach. With that kind of money, Rebecca could have anything she wanted. She could travel to the big cities, see specialists, live in luxury. What could he possibly offer her compared to that? "You could leave all this behind," Robert gestured around the simple office. "This little school, this rough life. You deserve better than this." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter in her hands. Finally, she looked up at Robert with fire in her eyes. "Better than this?" she repeated. "Robert, do you know what this school means? Do you know that we have children here who couldn't even write their names 2 years ago, and now they're reading books and solving mathematical problems?" Robert looked confused. "Well, yes, I'm sure it's nice work, but surely you can see that you have options now, real options." "I see that I have choices," Rebecca said firmly, "and I choose to stay exactly where I am." Robert turned to Tommy. "You can see that this would be best for her? She could have medical care, opportunities." Tommy felt his heart breaking, but he forced himself to speak honestly. "If Rebecca wants to go, I won't stand in her way. I want what's best for her, even if that means losing her." Rebecca spun her wheelchair to face Tommy directly. "Thomas Peterson," she said, using his full name in a way that made him pay attention. "Do you really think so little of me? Think I would abandon everything we've built together? Abandon you? Just because I've come into money? I just want you to be happy, Tommy said quietly. And listen to me very carefully, Rebecca said, her voice strong and clear. Was purchased for $1 by a poor cowboy who saw something valuable in me when my own family threw me away. That cowboy became my husband, my partner, and the love of my life. He helped me build something meaningful with my life when everyone else thought I was worthless. She reached out and took Tommy's hand. The money doesn't change anything about who we are or what we mean to each other. If anything, it just gives us the resources to help even more people. Robert looked stunned. But Rebecca, you could have servants, luxury. I have something better than servants, Rebecca said. I have a husband who built ramps so I could access our home. I have students who light up when they master a new skill. I have a community that values what I contribute, not what I lack. She opened the letter from her uncle and read it silently. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face, but she was also smiling. What does it say? Tommy asked gently. It's an apology, Rebecca said, a real one. He admits that he was wrong to drive that night, wrong to cover it up, and wrong to let the family push me away. He says he's been haunted by guilt every day since the accident. She folded the letter carefully. Robert, I accept the inheritance, but not to come home. This is my home now. We'll use the money to expand the school, to help other people who've been forgotten or cast aside like I was. Robert shook his head in bewilderment. I don't understand. You're choosing this over everything we're offering? I'm choosing love over money, Rebecca said simply. I'm choosing purpose over comfort. Choosing the life I've built with my husband over the life other people think I should want. After Robert left, clearly confused but carrying Rebecca's formal acceptance of the inheritance, Tommy and Rebecca sat together in their office. Are you sure? Tommy asked. It's enough money to set you up for life, even without me, Rebecca laughed, the sound bright and joyful. Tommy, do you remember what you wrote in your first letter to me? You said you were offering me your last dollar, not because it was a lot of money, but because it represented everything you had. Tommy nodded. That dollar was worth more to me than 50,000, because it came with something money can't buy. It came with a man who was willing to give everything he had for a chance at building something beautiful together. She pulled out a small cloth bag from her desk drawer and emptied it into her palm. There was Tommy's original silver dollar, polished bright and shining. I've kept this since our first anniversary, she said. It reminds me that the most valuable things in life aren't the ones you can buy. They're the ones you build with the people you love. That evening, they sat on their porch planning how to use the inheritance. They would expand the school, build a proper library, maybe even start a program to train other teachers for rural communities. The money would let them help hundreds more families, but it wouldn't change who they were or what they meant to each other. You know what the funny thing is? Rebecca said as they watched the sunset. Robert thought he was offering me a better life, but I already have the best life possible. I have work that matters, a husband who loves me, and a future full of possibilities. Tommy squeezed her hand. When I sent that letter with my last dollar, I thought I was the one taking a risk. But you took the bigger risk, trusting a stranger with your future. The best investments aren't always in money, Rebecca said. Sometimes they're in people. And you, my dear husband, have given me the greatest return on investment anyone could ask for. Years later, when people asked Tommy about the secret to their success, he would pull out that worn silver dollar and tell them the same thing every time. Sometimes the smallest gesture, made with the biggest heart, can change everything. I didn't buy a wife for $1. I found a partner who helped me discover that the richest life isn't measured in money, but in the love you share and the good you do for others. The Prairie View School still stands today, a testament to what two people can build when they see the best in each other and refuse to let the world define their worth.